Excellent. Okay, well, I'm going to share my screen.
Okay.
And let's see, hopefully, let's see. Can you see the Edgar
Yep.
Allan brand concepts? Awesome. Okay, great. So, like I mentioned, we're going to look at kind of three different ideas I've had on ways that we can approach this. But just kind of to kind of walk you through my thought process of like just where to begin. And I was thinking I don't really make sports analogies very often, so I'm probably going to say all the wrong sports words, but I know that you've kind of had different kind of starts and stops and thinking about like how to evolve the brand. And I kept thinking about like in basketball, like when the player is like dribbling and they stand still and they're trying to decide which way to go, but they've got that one foot really planted and anchored while the other one's kind of pivoting to try to figure out how they're going to strategize their next move. And so that was kind of like my approach to this, was thinking about like, where are we anchoring? Because honestly, I've always really liked your brand. It's always been really friendly and distinctive. And, it's kind of like, how do we keep what's working? And then how do we pivot to evolve it to kind of take you where you need to go next, kind of for your business. So that's my sports analogy. So
Awesome. Well, I'm also not really sporty, but I appreciate the idea of pivot. So
I was like, I'm going to say all the wrong technical basketball things,
yeah.
but I kept thinking about that pivoting thing. So,
Yep.
so kind of where to anchor. And I thought, like, where are you unique? And then also with anything, and like with Felicis and Narmi, it's always like thinking about like, there's brand equity. Your business has existed for a while. You have relationships, with different clients and stuff, and that like not throwing the baby out with the bathwater, that there's really some good stuff there. How do we anchor to that and then build on that? So starting with obviously the kind of research and digging into your website, your social media, just all the stuff that you guys do. And it's just like really impressive um, content creation, which I have to say is like really unusual, and that is just really impressive. And so it's just kind of digging into that, talking with you, talking with Kendra, talking with their team members and stuff like that, just to kind of get a feel for kind of the culture and what your kind of ambitions are, and then looking at the existing mark, the existing brand, and seeing kind of what do we want to retain. Obviously there's some recognition to that. We don't want to get rid of that. We don't want it to feel like, I think I joked with like, I like Lady Gaga, I like my mom, but I don't want maybe my mom to have Lady Gaga's hairdo kind of thing. Like you don't want it to feel so different that people don't recognize you. And just kind of, these were the things that I kind of anchored to in terms of like who you guys are, right? You're super smart group of people, also really friendly, and I think that comes across in the brand, which is a unique thing. Obviously incredibly talented. There's also a kindness that comes through your brand, that I also think is a distinctive thing, a kind of character to your brand that I think is worth retaining. And then also just that prolific creation of content, which is again another kind of unique thing about your brand, and kind of how do we retain that. And so some of the visual things that I saw in your brand that I love, and that are very distinctive, is in the word mark itself. The curved A is a very distinctive letter form that you don't see very often. And it's always been something I've really appreciated about it. At a time where everybody's doing very geometric sans serif lowercase letters, like it's got a distinctive look to it. And what's interesting is the form of the N. A lot of times, typefaces that have that curved top A also have a curved N, but you guys have that angular N, and it keeps it from being overly stylized. Sometimes that curved A, it was interesting. I did a ton of research looking at different typefaces that have that curved A, and they either got like super kind of futuristic techie, or they got overly stylized. But yours strikes that nice balance of having something that's visually distinctive, but also doesn't feel like overly cliched techie or too stylized. Um, Also anchoring to the idea, and I love both talking with you and Kendra, this idea of like starting with a great story, versus I think a lot of times companies that are in the tech sector, it's more about the technology, but like you guys grounding it in the idea of a great story that also feels like a differentiator. So I know you had mentioned Penguin, and I did start thinking about you guys as like almost like a publisher, you know, rather than a firm. It's like that kind of content creation, and it's the great stories behind it, and really creating a system that allows you to tell those great stories. And then the blue color, I think, you know, that's something that you guys have used. There's brand recognition to it. It's a beautiful color. It feels both progressive, but also friendly. So those were some of the things that I anchored to in this, and kind of these visual directions. Um, so thinking about that, kind of what can the brand be, and thinking about like, how can it be an evolution? Also, how can the brand help you with this idea of like being content makers? How can it be nimble? How can it, you know, especially with like showing client work, like on your website, there's moments where that needs to take the forefront, and the Edgar Allan voice needs to you know, be supportive, but kind of disappear a little bit. But there are other moments like on social media and stuff where it really needs to have kind of, that needs to lead and have more of a sense of like a distinct character. And then it was really helpful to looking at your competitors, the Lion website. If, I'm blanking, Finn, I'm blanking on the second part. I had my speaker.
Fin Suite.
Fin Suite.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that kind of like, and you had sent me some examples of like, how do we stay confident, you know, kind of how do we compete with the people who have a lion who have a lion on their homepage, kind of thing, right? So this like, what's that self-assured version of Edgar Allan, but at the same point retaining the soul of your company, who you guys are. You're not trying to be the lion, you know, and keeping what's great. So you'll see 3 different versions. What I did for each of these is I started first with the word mark, because there were some of those visual elements with the A and the N that I thought were really important to keep for that brand recognition and also visual distinctiveness. So each of these directions started with a typeface. I like went through hundreds of typefaces. It is hard to find typefaces with a curved A, but I found some really beautiful ones. So you'll see directions that are either using directly that typeface, or I found ones where I manipulated it, you know, to work better with a kind of the concept. So you'll see kind of 3 different approaches to it. The first one is just, what is a close, you know, what is that closest evolution of the brand? And so I found this gorgeous typeface called Hauska. I've got my notes here. It was by this guy, Nick Cook. And it was based on a confectioner's store signage they saw in Salzburg, but it has this curved A. It's got the straight angled N, but it also has some really other interesting letters. It had this gorgeous R that adds, again, kind of that nice friendliness, but it also feels really confident, but not so much of a departure that it doesn't still feel Edgar Allan. So you'll see that in the word mark, and then how that could play out to the icon, breaking that, you know, we've got that lockup, that ligature with a stacked, it causes it to be a little bit smaller in that circle space, but I still liked that kind of definitive E and A. So rather than having them link, break, so we can get that a little bit bigger, be a little bit kind of visually stronger. And then you can see kind of a comparison of like where we are now versus where this direction would take you. And you can see it still feels like Edgar Allan, but feels like a confident evolution of that, still retaining a lot of the same, I'd say, personality of the original mark. And then the fun thing, again, kind of thinking about you guys as like content creators, almost like that publisher, thinking about the system that will allow you to, you know, be there, have a visual voice, but also be able to kind of play how loud that visual voice is. So thinking about other things in the system, like color palette, again, kind of all of these directions, you'll see have that base color of that really great blue, but bringing in other kind of pops of color. So you'll see these kind of other bright, kind of really optimistic colors. And then this direction uses that Hauska typeface. One of the cool things about this typeface, the guy that designed it, he started out as a letterer, but his typefaces in general, what's really cool about them is because he started out as like a hand letterer, he's be able to create typefaces that work as like display typefaces, so they have some sense of character to them, but they're also really usable. So this is Hauska Pro, which has these amazing alternate characters, so that sometimes you can use the straight A, you know, because like if you've got long copy, you're not always going to want to use the curved A. And there's just all these really cool kind of alternate glyphs that are built into that typeface. And so you can see in type, we can have it be very usable in body copy, but then using those alternate glyphs, we can kind of bring in a little bit of character. So you'll see it, you can kind of substitute ones out. So at moments I put in the alternate T, like in the headlines, or there's an alternate E, or even like the R. And so there's kind of a bunch of neat stuff. It's like one of those typefaces. It was like really fun to discover all the things that are kind of hidden in it, but it allows you to have that strong visual voice through type, but also be very usable. And so thinking about that, kind of the system of the main word mark, the icon, color palette, typeface, kind of what does that look like when we start using it in these kind of instances. And so thinking about the website, and, especially on the website, like where you want to showcase your client's work, where visually that needs to kind of take front and center, but being able to use the type to have a distinctive Edgar Allan voice. So when you see the type, it's the Edgar Allan voice, and being able to kind of use that Hauska typeface. And so I was just kind of mocked it up thinking about like, you even like the content creation, maybe there's, rather than kind of having it, buried on the site, maybe it's almost like New York Times or something where you've got, because you guys are great content creators, that you've got kind of whatever's, on your mind and whatever's the newest kind of post kind of elevated at the top of the website. And then kind of how it can, just testing things out, see how it works on social media. Again, kind of having that icon be really kind of a little bit more bolder and assertive, kind of so it can kind of stand up in that, it gets kind of visually noisy in a lot of the social media kind of screens and stuff. And then the fun part is like moments where the Edgar Allan voice needs to come through, like especially like on Instagram or post, where bringing in the color, that distinctive typeface. And the nice thing about the typeface too is it allows you to have that variety. So, and this is all just stock stuff. So I also wanted to test this out. Like, could the system work just pulling stuff? So all the images are stock with the exception of the images from like your office or stuff. But you can see just like those kind of color, the typeface, and it allows you to, maybe it's like cheekier, where you've got the can't touch this QR codes, MC Hammer dancing on a QR dance floor kind of thing, or moments where it needs to be a little bit more luxurious, like with the changing the face of luxury in the digital world. But that typeface allows you that range to feel both playful and when serious when it needs to be. And then testing it out and kind of some of the other applications I know that you guys have used, and especially with the things that are coming up, things that you may want to have that sense that they're the visual voice of Edgar Allan. So looking at your retro cards, what would look like if we applied the system, this first concept system to that. And then it's always fun, I know Farbart show tote bag, everybody always shows a tote bag, so you got to show a tote bag, but it makes for a really nice kind of bold, confident kind of evolution of where you are now. So that's the first concept. The second concept, I wanted to try what happens if we move a little bit farther away, but still, again, kind of anchored to the things that we want to keep. And I loved the thing that you talked about, like with Sub Pop. So I was thinking about that, like attitude, it's kind of like that, like punk rock a little bit, it's kind of like, what's the Edgar Allan Lion version? And so found this typeface called Mechanic that was great, had this great curved A. This is actually much modified from the original. The original Mechanic typeface is like really tall. It's like maybe 4 times taller, this and really narrow, but it had this great curved A. It had a curved N, so I redrew the N to be able to have that angled N. But you can see it's got this, like, it still feels like friendly, but it's kind of that like more of an attitude and confident. It also does this cool thing. I adjusted the letters a little bit to create these like subliminal exclamation points kind of hidden in the A's and the R's. So it kind of has that like a little sense of, being kind of confident. And then what that could look like with the icon, where you bring this together. I started working with this idea of like a bracket, again, that visual voice, thinking about content and story and using some of the visuals of storytelling and kind of grammar, but this like kind of parentheses that could do really cool things you'll see in the brand, where you can start using that as a visual element. And so you can see the kind of comparison of where we are now versus like what this direction would look like. So you can see it's like it's really confident, but again, kind of retaining some of, it doesn't feel too much of a departure of the original. And then for this direction, looked at a color palette that would give you, if you needed a more kind of conservative options, like with the navy blue and stuff, maybe even the orange, but also might give you some edgy stuff, like with the pink or that dark green, so that you can kind of play up how, how much conforming or non-conformist you want it to be in different instances. And for this direction, chose a different typeface for the main kind of body copy. It's a typeface called Obviously, and it is absolutely gorgeous. It's a newer typeface. I think it came out in 2019-ish kind of thing. But it was designed by this guy, James Edmondson, and it was inspired by old like travel postcards and also vinyl signage in the Mission District of San Francisco. But it is an incredibly robust typeface family. It has a gazillion weights. I was like, I haven't seen a robust kind of collection as much as this, but it's got wide, it's got narrow, and it has this ability to be able to change the tone of voice depending upon, what you want your tone of voice to be in different instances. So it needs to be more professional. It can kind of tone down, and other moments where you want to be, maybe more loud or cheeky and stuff like that. It's got that ability. And so you can see what it looks like just in body copy when it needs to be more straight laced, but still even in like the headlines has a distinctive visual voice to it. And then the other cool thing with this particular direction is you could do a really cool thing taking the word mark and stacking it. There's a nice form thing that happens, and then flipping the L's so it becomes kind of like that bracket. It's a cool place where you could put messaging, but there's some really neat things that you could kind of do with that kind of dynamically. And then for this direction, also added in some patterns. I was thinking about the early Macintosh computers where they had this great kind of default patterns that feel digital, but also kind of edgy, that again, kind of just give you another ingredient in the system that allows you, when you need to just really kind of flex the Edgar Allan voice, has more options for you guys. So you can see what those system elements look like with the core word mark, the icon, color palette, bringing in some of the patterns and that Obviously typeface family. And what that looks like in use, you can see like on the website, and again, kind of being able to have the Edgar Allan voice come through the type, but letting the client work really kind of be showcased, and bring in some of those pops of color if you want to be kind of funkier, or if you need to be more conservative, you've got kind of a range of colors. And then how that could work on social media, again, kind of having a strong voice. And then looking at social media, and this is where it's really fun to kind of bring in some of those patterns, so that you could see if you saw any post, it would have a distinctly Edgar Allan visual voice. And it works with like color stock or black and white stock. And I was thinking about, I don't know if you've seen like Access News website, they do a really good job with their kind of visuals for their posts, where they use like stock, but in a really interesting way. So it's kind of inspired by that. And then looking at it on product, again, kind of that range, if you want to kind of have something that has that kind of confidence, a little bit more edgy feel, bringing in that Obviously typeface, like really big. And then, again, kind of the tote bag and how that kind of stacked version could work on that. So that's the second direction. And then the last direction, this one, I wanted to explore this idea of really embracing the friendliness of the brand. I think that that's something that also feels really distinctive in your space. If we look at all your competitors, they're either trying to be like super, professional kind of thing, or like with a lion. I keep going back to the lion because it's such an outlier, that thing, but you guys are a really friendly, nice, kind group of people to work with. And I think that that's something also that I think clients appreciate. So how do we, what would that look like if that was a direction? So this version uses a typeface called Cubano, which I love, is designed by some dude in Greenville. And he's not a type designer. He's self-taught and he likes to homebrew beer, but he created this typeface Cubano that's really beautiful, that again has that kind of curved A, the angled N, but feels confident, but still feels friendly. It doesn't feel like it's kind of shouting. It just feels kind of like warm and huggable. And then for this direction, for the icon, I was thinking about names and how Edgar Allan, the other two directions weight those equally. But for this direction, I was thinking, what if they weren't weighted equally? And I was thinking about how surnames that there's kind of more emphasis like on Poe or Garvin kind of thing. So we have Allan is kind of the major kind of weight to that, but with Edgar kind of embedded in it. And then I was also thinking about how it's like initials, like W.E.B. Du Bois, we're bringing in the period, and there's something nice that feels very definitive about that and declarative. So I kind of did the stacked version with bringing in this kind of dot to feel a little bit more like initials. And you can see kind of the where we are now versus this version. I did tweak the blue a little bit on this version. I just made it a little bit lighter, a little bit brighter. Again, kind of thinking about like a shade that feels a little bit more friendly, but still keeping with that kind of core blue. And then for this direction, again, kind of bright colors. What could that look like with the base of the blue? And for this direction, for the main body copy, chose a typeface called Rustica. What's neat about it, it's a new typeface. It's designed by Tipo Type. They're the first and only type foundry in Uruguay, but they have beautiful typefaces. And where a lot, and this in like in the digital space, a lot of companies, it's like the Gotham, the Proxima Nova, it's the geometric. And there's a gorgeous typefaces, but there's kind of a lot of sameness now in that. And one of the things I like about Rustica is it's still geometric, but it has this, they call it like humanist feel to it, where there's little echoes of it feeling more human. So it's still very geometric, but things like the lowercase g, where they call it like a double story G, or the tail on the Q, that just give it a little bit more of that sense of like, history and like being made kind of more like, I would say, kind of like feels like it's made with like the human hand. So that's this version Rustica, and you can see how that works in copy. And it's also, it's not as robust as obviously, but it does have a lot of different weights, and they allow you to kind of change the tonality of that voice. And then you can see how that kind of system could come together on the website with the using the voice and bringing in some of those elements, colors, shapes, and then, what it could look like on social media and how it could work on posts. Again, kind of maybe it's always in the Edgar Allan blue, but you use that Rustica typeface. So it's got the type has a distinctive visual voice, and then what it could look like on product, kind of another variation on that. And then I just thought this was really fun that as I was working on this, I was like, there's some neat things that you could do with this. So you'll see an animation of ways that you could in social media kind of do fun things with it. And then I found there was this little guy when you turn the E. So there's kind of some fun things that would allow you to kind of bring out that friendliness in this version. And then for this version, I figured tote bag didn't work for it. So instead, you can see kind of playing around with those. But for this version, instead of a tote bag, maybe socks. And this has the little character with the sideways E. I was thinking maybe he could be called Edgar kind of thing, but just kind of a fun little guy, the little kind of wink in the system that makes it just kind of a fun, playful thing. So those are the three directions. And I just put a slide in here just to kind of recap. So you can see those three, the first one being a direction that's kind of a closer evolution to where you are now. The middle one, kind of what's a more confident, assertive version of Edgar Allan, and that third direction kind of embracing that friendly, but all kind of anchored to some of the core things that I think that are very valuable about your brand and are worth retaining. And that's it.
Yeah, awesome.